So a very good morning, good afternoon to everyone, and a very warm welcome from IACC and Electro Media. Today's webinar will be looking at building a responsible AV technology services operation. For those who haven't joined one of our sessions before, we will put you all on mute, which will avoid any disturbances during the session. And can I encourage you all to use your chat box at the bottom of your screens for any questions. And those who've been unable to join today, we will, as always, record the session, and I will forward the recording with the slides to you all after the webinar. Now, if I'd like to hand you over to today's presenter, Eric Bracht. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Kate. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Just a little quick background before we get going, just so you know what my experience is and where we're coming from. I've been in the hospitality industry and the AV industry for about 30 years. Previously to Electro Media Design, I spent 19 years at Marriott Hotels, running audiovisual departments of all sizes, from small airport properties to giant convention hotels, you know, anywhere from 25,000 square feet to 450,000 square feet. I left Marriott in 2009 and joined Electro Media Design. We're an audiovisual consulting firm that does audiovisual and acoustics design and consulting. We have done many hotels and conference centers and convention centers and churches and educational facilities and pretty much any place that has presentation equipment. But about 75% of our experience is in hospitality. And we have over 1,000 successful projects all over the globe. I've also been involved with IACC for about 10 years. This coming up conference will mark the 10th time I've been on the planning committee for the Americas conference, and I was on the board of directors for a 2-year stint from 2017 to 2019. Very quickly, Electro Media Design was founded in 1990, so we've been around a while. We do audiovisual and acoustics design and consulting. We're independent consultants, so we don't sell anything other than our expertise. So, you know, we don't sell or install any equipment, so we've got no dog in the fight to sell people equipment they don't need. And we specialize in the hospitality and adult education environments. My role with the company when I joined in 2009 was to develop an operational consulting practice, so to get away from the design side and actually help people. Who do we hire? How do we do this? What equipment do we need? All those kind of questions. After about 5 years, we discovered that a lot of people needed the same type of resources, so that's when we developed our Avistar program. And Avistar is a program that supports primarily self-operating departments and provides an above property level of support that currently really doesn't exist in the industry, and that comes along with a web-based software program that properties can use to keep themselves organized and avoid the catering software, spreadsheets, sticky notes, whiteboards, and all the other ways they try to keep themselves organized. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? We're going to basically talk about the ways that you can look at the systems that you have and evaluate, what you can do with what you have, both from a built-in system and from a portable equipment that you may or may not have on property, in ways that can impact the customer experience. Now, as we all know, some of this equipment is not cheap. Some of it is, some of it's not. So we're going to understand how to budget for both short-term and long-term goals, both from a maintenance and a replacement standpoint. We're going to talk about the KPIs you want to use to measure your business. As I said, I spent 20 years at Marriott, where the mantra was, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So we're very focused on measuring both the revenues and the expenses, so that you can manage your department well. And then obviously, whatever you're doing, whether you've got dedicated AV staff or no AV staff, or the IT people do it or the banquets people do it, you need to have some kind of system that supports them in order to make it effective, and make it a process-based business instead of a people-based business where why didn't it get there? Well, somebody was supposed to put it there. So that's basically the things we're going to talk about today. So we're going to start out looking a little bit about the building blocks of AV service. Now, the first thing involved in presentations is the room that you're in. They have, that room that you're in can have a big impact on the presentation before you even get to technology. So we're going to talk about the environment and the room. We're obviously going to talk about the equipment because that's the way presentation systems work. There's projectors and screens and microphones and mixers and all the pieces parts that go together to create the presentation systems that the customers need in your spaces. Then we're going to talk about something that gets left out a lot. A lot of times people will skip straight from equipment up to staff, but really you want to have procedures in place. Most other departments have standard operating procedures or some kind of written instructions on how do you bake a cake, how do you set tables and chairs, how do you clean a guest room. But a lot of times that gets missed in AV. And there's really no procedures, written procedures. It's, we're going to hire somebody and we're going to hope that person knows what they're doing. And if that person leaves, we're going to have to start all over again. So that's that's something that has to be thought out and put into place. And then obviously staff. Some places are going to have dedicated AV staff. Other places are going to do provide services with the setup folks or the IT folks or the banquet folks or whoever else is in charge of meetings is going to also try to handle the AV as well. So if that works in a facility, that's great, but we still need to be able to support those people, and sometimes they'll need a little bit more support than the folks who have some AV background. Okay, so like I said, the first thing we're going to start with the environment, because it all starts with the room. One of the things that we always say is no amount of technology can fix a bad room. So, if the room is already difficult to hear in or see in, you're starting off on the wrong foot. So one of the things we talk about or that we look at when we go do an evaluation of a space is the acoustics. Acoustics is a science that you might not understand a lot about, but the things that we're concerned with are pretty simple, and a lot of people can look at them and understand them, and given a few examples on how to look at it, can easily evaluate their spaces. So the main thing we talk about for acoustics is background noise, reverberation, and isolation from adjacent spaces. Now, background noise is pretty easy to figure out. Background noise is, if you stand in the room when it's empty, what do you hear? Can you hear the HVAC system? Do you hear the fan cycle on and off? Is there a rattle in the fan? Is there a lot of air movement noise when the fan comes on? Those kinds of things that just create distractions for the guests that are in the room in a meeting. Reverberation is pretty simple. That's echo. And one thing you can do to see how reverberant your space is when it's empty, stand in the space and clap. One clap. Do you hear that clap, or do you hear it echo 2 or 3 times? When it comes back to you. Well, that's reverberation. And if the clap does that, then speech is going to do the same thing. And the more reverberation there is, the more times you hear the same thing, and the harder it is to understand things. So when you're talking about your audio system and microphones, those are just going to excite that space even more. This reverberation is something that makes it more difficult to understand what the speaker is saying. And then isolation from adjacent spaces is just basically a technical way of saying, do you hear sound coming from the back service aisle or the pre-function space or the meeting room next door? And that's also pretty easy to figure out if you're standing in an empty space that's quiet. What do you hear? Can you hear the banquet department moving queens through the back aisle? Can you hear people in the pre-function space? If there are windows, do you hear things from outside. Um, if there's an air wall, can you hear what's going on the other side of the air wall? And one of the quick tests that we tell people to do for that is to, if you stand in an empty meeting room with the lights off and have the lights on in the meeting room on the other side of the operable partition. And if you see light leaks anywhere, in between, above, or below the air walls, well, that's sound leak. That's, if light can get through, then sound can get through, and that's something you can look at and maybe fix. The seals on the bottom, or just proper training on setting up the air walls correctly with the staff, and those kind of things can fix or at least mitigate some problems, pretty easily just by looking at those kind of things. Another thing we talk about in the spaces is lighting, and when we talk about lighting, we talk about both ambient lighting and the architectural lighting. Again, fancy words. Ambient lighting mean if you have windows, it's just natural light. Ambient light is sunlight, or any light from outside that's not in the space. So when we talk about ambient light control, we talk about things like blackout shades, or some kind of way to cover windows or prevent outside light from getting in. When we talk about architectural lighting, we're simply talking about the lights that are in the room. And can you control them? Do they dim? Do you have presets that can at least take your lights from 100% to 66% to 33% and off? More is better, and if you have the ability to do presets and actually make controls in the room, that's great. Several years ago, people started switching out incandescent with fluorescents, and probably quickly discovered that fluorescents don't dim like incandescent lights do. Fortunately, now we're moving to LED, which will, so some of that problem might go away. But you also want, if you look at the picture there, you can see a problem you may have in your spaces where you see the lights that are over the screen shining on the light, or shining on the screen. And one of the things that does is, if you look at that screen and realize that when you project an image on it, it's very difficult to project black, because black is the absence of light. So if you look at that screen, you can see, if you try to project just black on it, you're going to get those images from the lights above, which could be distracting for people if you're trying to show detail or images or something in a presentation. So those are the types of things that we look at when we talk about, we want to say a bad room, but characteristics of the environment that you may need to overcome with your presentation systems. Okay, so now we'll talk about the next step in the process, which is equipment. And equipment is just that. It could be built-in or portable systems that you use to provide presentation services. And when we look at the installed system capabilities, what we want to look at is, sound systems. Most places will have installed, ceiling speakers. That's for voice reinforcement and background music. Some places may, especially IACC facilities, may have program audio systems. Program audio is simply the audio that's associated with any screen presentation. If it's a video and there's audio in the video, that's program audio. If you have a computer presentation that has some sound built into it, that's program audio. And we like to have program audio systems in spaces where it's appropriate, because it's more natural to hear the sound that's associated with the presentation coming from the presentation, as opposed to seeing a presentation on one wall and then hearing the sound come from overhead. So that's the reason we encourage program audio in spaces where it's appropriate. Now, obviously, the larger the space, the harder that is to do. We're going to talk a little bit about displays, and displays can be basically two different kinds. We can either do projector and screen, and that can either be front or rear, or we can do direct view displays. Direct view displays are flat panels that are either mounted on the wall or on stands or what have you. That it's flat panel displays. televisions that you're used to seeing, or displays that are on the walls. We already talked a little bit about lighting. When we're talking about lighting, there's architectural lighting, ambient lighting, and feature lighting. Feature lighting would be, lights that you either have already installed or can put up on a temporary basis to put a light on the lectern, or to put a light on some type of stage area, or even decoratively to use to highlight buffets and that kind of stuff. And then we also talk about infrastructure. And infrastructure is the things that are built into the building to support your presentation needs. Input-output plates on the walls that you plug microphones into, or plug projectors into, or computers into to get to the projectors that are built in. We talk about all that cabling that's inside the walls, power to make sure that there's, obviously convenience power, you need outlets, but some larger places may need special power. If it's a larger place that does events, some of the lighting and sound and things that are brought in might need more than just being plugged into the wall. And then we also talk about show flow on the infrastructure. And when we talk about show flow, we're talking about things like, how do the guests get into the meeting space? How do the guests get into the meeting room? And one of the things that we notice especially in educational and conference centers, is that they have been built with classrooms in mind. And if you think about classrooms in schools, the door wants to be up front so that the teacher can see who's coming and going. But when you get into adult education and meetings in our environment, that doesn't necessarily work, because you want we're adults who have jobs, and they may need to get up and leave the meeting to deal with something, or they come and go, or leave a little early, or come in a little late, without disrupting the meeting. So in that scenario, you really want your doors in the back of the room, not the front of the room, so that they don't interrupt the presentation as it's going on. Now, I can see the chat box, and I haven't seen a question pop up yet, but if anybody does have questions, please feel free to chime in at any time. I know with microphones off, it can be difficult to do that, but if you come up with a question and I don't catch it, Kate will see it, and we'll be able to answer those. Okay. Now, when we talk also about built-in systems, we want to look at the system and find out what can we provide simply with the installed systems. And the first thing we want to know is, do our installed systems meet today's requirements? Now, most places are caught up now, but there still can be some places, if you have built-in projectors and screens or displays, several years ago, you would connect to those with a 15-pin VGA connector. Today, those don't even exist on laptops anymore. Most people, if you're talking PC, are going to have an HDMI, or at the very least a DisplayPort output, a digital output, as opposed to the analog VGA connection. And do your facility support that? Do the connections in the wall? Do you have HDMI connections in the wall in order to be able to support that? If not, I'm sure that's causing you some challenges. But when you look at your space, what can you provide without having to bring any temporary equipment into the room at all? And then what temporary equipment is needed in the space in order to complement the built-in system? So these are all questions that you want to look at and evaluate in your spaces, so that you can determine what supplemental equipment you need to meet your clients' expectations. And one of the things we always try to tell people is, base your needs on what your clients want. Whether you're an internal, a private facility that only services one guest, or a public facility that services a lot of guests, you probably still have, clientele with the same basic needs. And a lot of that can depend on where you're at. If you're located in Silicon Valley, you're probably going to have customers whose expectations in presentation equipment is significantly higher than, if you're in a suburb of a small city someplace. Okay. And then, you know, everybody is probably going to need some type of portable equipment to go along with the built-in equipment that they have. And that's a lot of times some of the things we get called in to help with is to develop that portable list and figure out what they need, especially in facilities that might not have AV staff. And you know they may designate somebody as, well, you're in charge, and then that person may have done AV in their church once upon a time, or maybe they played in a band and know a little bit about audio equipment, and they get identified as, okay, well, you're in charge, and they have to then develop a list of portable equipment and try to keep that list up to date. And that may or may not be easy to do based on both the time they have in addition to all their other duties and their experience and knowledge of what's available. Also, when you're looking at what you might need to buy on a portable equipment standpoint, you want to look at what's available locally from providers, because it doesn't always make sense to own everything. If you need it on a regular basis, well, yeah, it might make sense to buy it. If you need it 2 or 3 times a year, it might make a lot more sense to rent it than to actually buy it. And the same goes for specialized labor. You may have a need for a camera operator once every 3 months. That's certainly not something you want to go out and hire a position for and then have that person try to do something else when they're not doing camera, because that doesn't tend to work a lot and people get unhappy and don't stay very long. And then one of the other things you want to do is to create pre-priced packages of portable equipment, because a lot of times the people who are selling these things or planning events or doing that might not be AV people. They might be banquet folks or event managers or people who will do the best job they can do, but the more tools you can give them to do the job, the easier it is for them and the better job they can do. And then when it gets to operations, things are already planned, and operations don't have to look at it and figure out, okay, well, here's what's missing. And you can do that with your local vendors as well. If you need a camera package, a lot of times that's the same thing all the time. So you can go to them and say, look, when I need this, how much is it going to cost me to have it brought in, with the labor and everything that comes in with it, so that you can then sell that to your clients, easily without having to get quotes from them every single time. But obviously you want to keep them in the loop. And then you just develop, service level agreements with them on, it will always be this price, and you will always get this discount, and you can always make this much on it, and establish, does anything change, if it's a Sunday as opposed to a Tuesday, and all that kind of stuff. So, if that's all worked out in advance, it makes it much easier on your planning folks to get that information, to the clients quickly, as opposed to having to get a quote every single time. Okay, and then obviously none of us go out and buy this stuff ourselves. We typically are working for an owner or a developer or an operating company that's going to spend the money on building in this equipment and buying the portable equipment. So what are we as operators going to do to make sure that equipment that investment in that equipment is protected? So the first thing we want to do is to either use or create an inventory log that contains all the information on that asset. Who did you buy it from? What did you pay for it? When did you buy it? What's the serial number if it has one? Do you have an asset system, an asset tag system, and what's the tag number? Is there a warranty on that piece of equipment? And if so, who's it with and when's it expire? Do you have a service contract on that piece of equipment? And if so, who's it with and when's it expire? What's the preventative maintenance schedule for that piece of equipment? Is it something you want to look at monthly or biannually or quarterly or yearly? And how do you make sure that if there is preventative maintenance on it, what is that preventative maintenance? What are the steps involved, and was it done? If something breaks, do you have a service ticket system that you have the ability to put in a service ticket on it so that it, we make sure that it doesn't just pulled from wherever it is and sits on a bench for a year. Um, are there, do you have a way to maintain detailed records so that, when it comes time to budget for things, can you budget appropriately for repair? Can you, do you have information that says we had to rent this, 5 times? It would make sense to buy it, in next year's budget. You know, we've had to repair this item 5 times. We really need to look at replacing it. And because we've had to repair it 5 times, we probably don't want to buy that same thing again. We want to buy something else. Just a couple examples of obviously I've made sure that there was no way to identify where this is from, but this is the kind of thing, when we talk about preventative maintenance, sometimes we're talking about things that can be performed on property, and sometimes it's things that we need a professional to do. But here's just an example of not doing preventative maintenance and what happens. And dust is not a friend to electronic equipment. If you look at the left side, those are amplifiers. Amplifiers can get a little warm, so all of that in the front are supposed to be holes where air gets into the amplifier and cools it. But as you can see, they're pretty well filled up with dust. So you can imagine that that's making those amplifiers work that much harder because they're not getting the air that they need. So this is simply a matter of cleaning, of keeping areas clean and keeping it free of dust. That's the same rack in the back that shows the same thing. Dust has just piled up, and eventually that's, if it hasn't already impacted the system, it will. Okay. All right, the next thing we want to talk about is procedures, and that's the way that you support your staff so that they can support your customers. Again, I mentioned it earlier, but we live by the mantra: if you can't manage it if you don't measure it. I have sat with plenty of GMs or directors of events who've said that we want to do a better job in AV services. We want to understand it better, and we want to make more money, or we want to save. We don't want to spend as much money. And the first thing I ask is, okay, well, what's your current revenue? What's your current revenue in AV or event technology? And they kind of look at me and say, well, we don't really know because it goes into this banquet other category. It could be audiovisual, or it could be flowers, or it could be a bus. We don't really know. Same thing from cost. Everything goes into banquet other, or maybe it goes into, well, there's, we have an audiovisual revenue line and we have an audiovisual cost line. That's a little better, but it still doesn't really tell you what you need to know to manage your business. From a revenue standpoint, you really want to be able to know, did we make that money on equipment rental? If we made it on equipment rental, was it our equipment or did we have to cross-rent it? Did we make that money on labor? And the same question there. If we made the money on labor, did we make the money on full or part-time associates for us, or did we have to bring in buyout contract labor in order to do that? Some departments operate specialized services. Some departments are responsible for internet and networking activities. You probably want to know how much revenue you made in that separately from AV. In a larger place, AV departments might be responsible for specialized services like rigging or specialized electrical services. At least be the ones who charge the revenue for that. Well, you want to know what revenue you made in that separately from AV as well. So, those are the kind of things that you want to track from a revenue standpoint to know to understand where your revenues are coming from. Same thing can be said on the cost side. You don't just, if you know that you spend, X number of dollars in AV costs, that's a start. But, did you spend that on, purchasing equipment? Did you spend that on renting equipment for guests that you then charged for? Did you spend that on things like flip chart paper and markers that are controllables, kind of a cost of sale? They're things that you need to have, and you do charge for them, but they're consumables. You don't get you don't get a flip chart paper back once it was used. That's just something that goes away. So you want to understand, did you have to bring in extra buyout labor? Where's that expense coming from? All these expenses can be tracked separately to make sure that you have the opportunity to look at it and figure out where are these expenses coming from, and is there a way I can reduce some of these expenses. So you want to identify those specific revenue and cost categories and then track them so that you understand where your opportunities to make more revenue if you're in a revenue generating facility are, and then everybody obviously wants to know, okay, how can we cut expenses? How can we manage this and cut expenses? And then obviously you want to develop standard reporting for that so you can manage these things both from an operational and a financial perspective. And all of this then allows you to budget for anticipated costs. The more you understand what you're spending, the more you can identify, was it repairs, was it maintenance, was it consumable supplies, and how do we cut those costs down? And again, you want to, what resources are available to support your on-site staff? Do you have resources available to support the on-site staff? You really want to assess what the technical staff needs are. Are you in a facility that needs dedicated AV technical staff, or are you in a facility that does mostly really basic stuff with mostly built-in equipment, and you service that with the staff that's there? If you do need a staff, how many people do you need? What's the head count? What type of positions do you need? Do you need a technician, or do you need a supervisor, or do you need a manager? Because each of those people are gonna have different skill sets. You hope that they're all going to be technically qualified, but the higher up the level we go, there's levels of management experience that are needed in that as well. So you want to create job profiles if you do need specific types. You want to make sure you have a job profile for each position type and establish what their responsibilities are, instead of, well, we probably need an AV person, so we hire an AV person, and then come to find out that, or in other situations I've seen, you hire an IT person because that's something that you need, and then you expect that IT person to be able to do the AV, and they're very different skill sets. You can, if you're really lucky, find an IT person who can do AV or an AV person who can do IT, but that's pretty few and far between in a lot of cases because, while signal transport may be digital these days, an IT person doesn't really, have the skill set to understand how to set up a microphone correctly. The same as an AV person might not understand how to build a virtual network. So you want to really drill down on what your facility really needs on that. And then you also, as we mentioned at the top of the webinar, really develop standard operating procedures to create a consistent and repeatable guest experience. Because just bringing in somebody and having them provide the service in whatever manner they deem fit to provide the service in doesn't really provide you with a consistent level of service. If that person leaves, somebody else comes in, and then it's up to them to determine, and it may be the same or it may be different. So developing standard operating procedures that say this is how we provide this service in this venue is really something that should be looked at and considered and done for every facility. If you operate several facilities, lots of times you can use the same ones. For instance, a hotel chain might want to make sure that they have the same type of service in each location. Other facilities may want to be able to start out because there's a lot of basics that are going to be the same in AV services no matter where you are, but then obviously each local place might want to then have their own spin on it to say, okay, well, we're going to do this, but then we're going to make it better by doing that. And we call those local standard operating procedures. And then I can't emphasize this enough. A formal training program is really, really crucial when it comes to AV services and keeping them consistent. Because what we see in a lot of places is at one time there was somebody who knew how to do something there, and they trained the people who were there at the time to do it. But then they leave. So the people that were trained to do it then train the next people to do it. And if you've ever played a game of telephone, you know how this is going to go. So a formal training program that establishes milestones and assessments to make sure that when someone new comes in, they're trained correctly. And then obviously we all know technology changes, so we need some way to update that to make sure that those are, as new skills are, as new things come along that require new skills, there's a way to access that information and get your folks trained, both technical and non-technical staff. Okay, and speaking of non-technical staff, most sales and planning staff don't have a technology background. They may have worked in the industry and have some learnings that they made, but there's really, non-technical references and checklists for these people are really going to go a long way in making sure that they are planning events that the operations folks can then execute. If you're in a revenue-generating facility, you want to establish pricing for all of your equipment and services, and you want to align that with your local market strategy. You're all familiar with that, I'm sure, from in a revenue-generating facility with with checking the local market and having a strategy of do we want to be a market leader in pricing? Do we want to sit in the pocket of the market? Or are we, looking to be, we've got all this built-in stuff, and we can offer, we can offer this service. It doesn't cost us near as much, so we can offer it at a lesser, we can still provide a great experience, but provide it at a lesser place than all the hotels in the area. Then that's going to be a competitive advantage for us. So we're going to do that. All of that is perfectly valid strategy. It all depends on your facility and what works. And then again, and I apologize if, for those of you not at a revenue generating facility, but, if you are at one, you want to create, pricing guides and service packages and outside provider guidelines and all the things that are going to help you be able to provide those services in a consistent basis. Inventory management is another thing. We talked about, we're responsible for managing and protecting the assets that the owner of our facility has paid a lot of money for, and we need to know where our projector is. Do you have an inventory system that has a management system that has asset tags that identify that this is your equipment, it's your property, and each one is identifiable by its tag, so that if I have 10 microphones, each microphone has a tag on it, so I don't have to worry if I'm doing an inventory. I don't, and maybe I started an inventory on Monday and I finished it on Tuesday, and I've counted, 8 microphones in this room and 2 microphones over there, or 8 microphones on Monday I counted, and the next day I find 2 in a closet. And I don't have to wonder, okay, are these 2 different microphones, or are they 2 microphones that I counted in the 8 yesterday and got moved to the storage closet? Well, an inventory tag system prevents that worry from happening because each has its own identifiable number on it. And then you want to analyze your equipment and systems' current performance and condition rating and anticipated service life and its service status. If you have 10 microphones and somebody used one of them to hammer something into the wall, so there's a giant dent in the windscreen, you want to take that out of service and be and have it repaired. So now you only have 9 microphones available. So, do you have a system that, will alert you? It used to alert you that, oh, okay, at 10 microphones, at the 11th microphone, you're going to be short one, and you get an alert. You get an alert for it. But now does you need a way to know that, okay, now you only have 9. So at the 10th microphone, you need to know that you're short one. And you also want to identify, and set up storage areas. You want your storage areas to be clean, secure, and climate controlled. Climate controlled, especially for, electronic equipment. We saw the picture, of the equipment rack a few slides ago that had all the dust and everything built in. That was all over everything. So you want to, the cleaner you can keep a room, the less that's going to happen. And climate control, because this is electronic equipment. So if you keep it in a storage container out on the behind the back dock, and you're in an area where it gets hot and humid in the summertime, you go out and get it, get a projector and you bring it inside where it's air conditioned and nice and cool. We've all seen what happens with, when anybody who wears glasses knows what happens when you walk from humid to air-conditioned space. It fogs up and you get condensation, and that is not good for electronic equipment. So, you want to have clean, secure, secure obviously, because you want to, you don't want your stuff walking away. Clean, secure, and climate-controlled storage areas. This is just an example of the kind of asset tag that we encourage our customers to use. Okay, and then resource scheduling is very important. You need to have a system for scheduling things that you don't have. So you want to either secure or create a system to schedule and forecast what equipment and resources are you going to need tomorrow and next week and next month, so that these things don't sneak up on you and all of a sudden you're setting up the night before and you realize, oh, I'm short something, and I'm going to have to call somebody to get it first thing in the morning and try to rush it in here and get it set up before the customer comes in. So, do you have a way to identify that you're going to be short something, other than walking around and counting everything? You want to have a way to be able to contract and schedule equipment and resources from local vendors, whether it's whether it's a camera or a camera operator or both, or any of that kind of stuff. Again, we talked about tracking cost. Do you have a good system in order to identify that, yes, on this day we're going to need this, it's going to cost us this much, and we're going to charge the customer this much for it. And then you want to create a training for the planning and operations staff on what those systems are and how to do it, and include all that in the SOPs. Obviously we recommend a purchase order system because it works really well to know what your costs are, and it also keeps track of, we had this cost in March, and we charged the customer for it in March, but it might have been the end of the month and the bill doesn't come until April, so we want to be able to accrue that cost in March, because that's when we realize the revenue for it. So we want to have a good schedule for that, a good way to do that. That might be sticky notes and whiteboards and that kind of stuff, or it might be a system that provides that tool. Okay, and then we talk about staff. Staff is the difference between providing equipment and providing a service. So when providing AV services is more than just providing equipment. Does your facility have a dedicated staff, or does it have a non-technical staff that provides that service? And then if it has a technical staff, who hires them? And who determines what their qualifications are? And do you have a way to provide ongoing training and that for all of that information? Now, who evaluates new technologies and services and products and all the things that you could offer to the guests and offer as enhancements that would potentially increase your revenues or reduce your operating costs, but you don't have anyone, you may not have anybody on property who can do that. And that's one of the things we talked about is, you may have if your on-site staff is a technician, that person may be good at doing, but they might not be so good at managing, or they might be capable of doing it, but don't have the tools and resources that empowers them to do it. So basically, you have to look at what you want to be able to provide to your guests, and is the staff you have capable of providing that that service to the guests. How complex are the services that your guest needs? And if that is, a lot of, I need a flip chart and I need to show my computer presentation and I need a microphone because the room is big, that is not incredibly complex. On the other hand, if you have customers on a regular basis who say, yeah, I want to stream I want to webcast our meeting, and I need a camera and I need lighting, in that case, then you do have some complex needs. One of the things you want to look at too is you have technical staff that only appears to be busy at the beginning and the end of the day. There are ways to overcome that. What might need to be done in order to give them more things to do. How much time does the staff spend setting up or putting away equipment versus providing customer service? All of those are a blend of, okay, how much equipment is built in and how much equipment is portable. The more built-in stuff you have, the more the staff can spend time servicing the guests as opposed to moving equipment from point A to point B. But again, not every space is appropriate for built-in equipment. So you've got to do a balancing act there of what your needs are. Okay, so in summary, and I apologize, this has gone a lot longer than I thought it would. To build a responsive AV service operation, we need to demonstrate that we're managing the owner's investment in both built-in and portable AV equipment. We're managing the inventory, we're keeping it up, we're maintaining it, we know where it is, we know it's secure, and we know, how long of a life we expect to have out of it. We want to be able to measure financial and operational KPIs. We talked about, how to identify opportunities to increase sales, how to identify opportunities to decrease expenses, how to keep the staff productive, how to make sure that they enjoy their jobs and they're challenged, but they're not overly stressed, and have opportunities to grow. We want to be able to, ability to supplement the on-site staff as needed, and assist with solutions to challenges and identify and solve reoccurring issues. And then training and education is important. If we have staff, we want to invest in staff. There's usually training programs. You don't hire a chef and hope they know what they're doing. There's training programs and programs and recipes and things that they follow. And we just want to have the same thing for the technical staff. And then have thoughtful evaluations of new technologies, not just rush out to buy the latest and greatest things. One of the questions we ask people a lot of times is, when we're doing live educational sessions, is how many people bought smart boards? And you see a bunch of hands go up, and how many of those smart boards are sitting in closets because nobody uses them? And most of the hands go back up because it's very rare to have a presenter say, "What new technology do you have that I have no idea how to use that's going to embarrass me in front of everybody? Because I'd really like to have that." That doesn't happen very often. In facilities where you have the same presenters all the time, those are the kind of opportunities where you have those specialized equipment to come in. So, you want to, new technology is great, but is it applicable for the customers that you have? And then again, it's all about customer satisfaction. So the more we understand what our business is, the more we can react to and improve our service. Okay. Again, thank you very much, everybody. It's always tough to not see people and know who's got questions. I didn't notice anything coming in the chat, but now would be the time we can open up microphones if anyone has any questions or topics that they'd like some more information on.
Microphones are open if anyone has any questions for Eric. No questions?
Anyone?
Thank you, Brian.
Well, I'm going to hope that means that it was I covered all the topics well, but certainly anybody can get a question answered later if one comes up.
Yeah, and Brian, just to confirm, I will send the presentation and the recording from the webinar on to you all later today. So thank you all for joining. Eric, thanks very much for your time, and we'll speak to you soon. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.